Thank you for joining us for the BRF podcast. We will be releasing content from several classes that were recorded during the 2025 Brethren Bible Institute. Brethren Revival Fellowship, BRF, is a concerned movement among the brethren, seeking to call the church to stand firm for the authority of the Scriptures and to an emphasis upon the teachings of the New Testament as historically understood by the brethren. We work in the interest of proclaiming and preserving biblical values for living today. Thank you for listening. We hope that this content enriches your spiritual life and inspires you to continue fighting the good fight of faith.
I chose this particular topic because the women are often the hidden people in the Bible. The women are kind of the alsos. Now, I don't know that I'm going to put it in my notes or not, but you can go through and you can take, there's like 21 women mentioned in the New Testament. And you can go back and you can know the marital status of almost every one of them. I think there's like 2 of them that you don't know. How about say, Joseph of Arimathea or Zacchaeus? We have no idea because the women were tied to the men. And so I made a decision that we're actually going to start back a little bit. The world Jesus came to, which I think that's actually bad English. I think that's a dangling participle, and it should say the world to which Jesus came. But if you're an English teacher and you're offended, so be it. That is what we're doing for starting off for today. Before we begin, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Our Father and our God, it is so good to be here. It is so good to be here with brothers and sisters, many of whom we have known for many years, some who we are just beginning to know, but you have known all of us from before the earth began. Father, you know what each of us needs. You know what you have planned for each of us for this particular week. Pray that you would guide the speakers, be with me. I need you desperately this morning. Be with the other speakers. Be with the words that are poorly spoken, that your Holy Spirit might serve as the interpreter, and we'll give you all the praise and all the glory and all the honor. In the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Master, our advocate, our strength, and our wisdom. Amen. Yes, we're starting in Narnia. I do an awful lot of driving, and because now my life has me mostly in northern Pennsylvania and New York, and being in New York and doing this on any given week is probably a bad idea. I've done it at least once where I left here, drove to New York, came back down for the next morning. I'm getting too old for that business. And so I basically, I'm too old for that business as well. I scheduled basically everything that I'm supposed to be doing next week, either last week, everything's scheduled this week, either last week or next week. So I put in like a 90-hour week last week. And so my mind is still kind of on the road. But I do a lot of audiobooks. And I managed to get the entire Chronicles of Narnia on one audio section. It's like 21 hours long. And I was struck again by the last battle. Now, the Narnia Chronicles, if you're not familiar with them, are basically C.S. Lewis's analogy of Christianity and the world. And so in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Edmund is captured by the White Witch. And the White Witch is going to sacrifice Edmund on the stone table. And Aslan the lion, who stands for Jesus, meets with the White Witch and comes to an agreement that he will be killed instead of Edmund. And in the end, Aslan comes back to life and the stone table is broken. The last book is called The Last Battle. And it is somewhat like the book of Revelation. And so, in the last battle, the kids are all drawn back to Narnia. And they are pushed back into a stable by the enemy. And from that stable door, they watch the world be destroyed. And they watch the giant Time stand up and blow a trumpet. And the stars fall. And the waters rise. And the world's destroyed. And the kids began to go back through, and they turn around and realize that the stable is not what they thought it was. The stable, instead of being this dark hole, is a gateway to another world. And they begin to run. And they ran. And they ran. And suddenly they stopped. Those hills, said Lucy. The nice woody ones with the blue ones behind. Aren't they very like the southern border of Narnia? Like, cried Edmund after a moment's silence. Well, they're exactly like. Look, there's Mount Pyre with its forked head, and there's a pass into Archenland and everything, and yet they're not like, said Lucy. They're different. They have more colors on them, and they look further away than I remember, and they're more, I don't know. More like the real thing, said Lord Diggory softly. Suddenly, Farsight the eagle spread his wings, soared 30 or 40 feet up in the air, circled round, and then lighted in the ground. Kings and queens, he cried, we have all been blind. We are only beginning to see what we are. Up from there, I've seen it all. Ettinsmore, Beaver's Dam, the great river, the Cair Paravel still shining in the edge of the eastern sky. Narnia is not dead. This is Narnia. The eagle's right, said Lord Diggory. Listen, Peter, when Aslan said you could never go back to Narnia, he meant the Narnia you were thinking of, but that's not the real Narnia. That had a beginning and an end. It was only a shadow or a copy of the real Narnia, which has always been here and always will be here, just as in our own world. England and all is only a shadow or copy of something in Aslan's real world. You need not mourn over Narnia, Lucy. All of the old Narnia that mattered, all the dear creatures have been drawn into the real Narnia through the door. And of course it is different. It's as different as the real thing is from a shadow or waking life is from a dream. It was the unicorn that summed up what everyone was feeling. He stamped in the ground with his right forehoof in the ground and neighed and then cried, I've come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I've been looking for all of my life, though I never knew it until now. The reason why we love the old Narnia is that sometimes it looked a little like this. Then Aslan turned to them and said, you don't look as happy as I meant you to be. Lucy said, we're so afraid of being sent away, Aslan. You have sent us back into our own world so often. No fear of that, said Aslan. Have you not guessed? Their hearts leaped and a wild hope rose within them. There was a real railway accident, said Aslan softly. Your father and mother, and all of you, as you used to call it in the Shadowlands, are dead. The term is over. The holidays have begun. The dream is ended. This is the morning. And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful, I cannot write them. And as for us, this is the end of all the stories. And we can mostly, truly say they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world, all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. And now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever and ever. And every chapter is better than the one before. Does anything feel off in this world? Does anything just feel not quite right in this world? Blaise Pascal said there's a God-shaped vacuum in every heart. There is something not right with this world. The last time that I spoke away from home, that's actually not true. I was up in Maine since then. I was going to say the last time I spoke away from home was at Shining Light. That was the second last time. The day after I was at Shining Light, my sister-in-law went for surgery. And they closed her up. And so there's nothing they can do. And something doesn't feel right. And the baby is born deformed. And something just doesn't feel right. We have a few among us here that are starting to feel the effects of not being 20 anymore. And something doesn't feel right. My favorite part of the Narnia Chronicles in the last battle is when the kids are running. And they run faster and faster and faster and faster. And even Poggin the dwarf and Puzzle the donkey with his short, fat legs keeps up with the unicorn. And Lewis says that if you could run and never get tired, I don't suppose you would ever do anything else. That for me now is my vision of heaven. I can't even walk and not be weary anymore, let alone run and not be tired. What's heaven going to be like? I don't know, but there is a vacuum in my heart that tells me what heaven is going to be like. We live in this broken world that just isn't right. Some of you may have seen me come in this afternoon or this morning and immediately get a phone call and turn around and hurry back out. There's not a whole lot of calls that I would have taken, but that one said Annie on it, and I figured I'd better take it. Annie is a girl that years ago, she was with one of the girls that lived in our house. And God said, that one. And Annie still laughs when I say that she was the one that my mother warned me about. Annie's got pink hair. And she almost wears clothing sometimes. I had actually thought about bringing her here. I wasn't sure. I may have to put a sack over her to bring her in the door. I'm not sure if she's got anything decent to wear or not. But Annie has a job. And as we are speaking right now, she's beginning her first job. And after I'm done here, I'm going to go to Hobby Lobby and pick up Annie, and we're going to discuss it. And when you work with Annie, this broken, hurting kid, there is just something that doesn't feel right about this world. I deal with many kids who would deny God, but there is a vacuum in their heart. And there's a God-shaped vacuum. I've watched kids with had that vacuum filled with God. So where does that fit in with my topic of the week? Genesis, we see in the book of Genesis that everything was created good. Genesis 1:31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Then the Lord God said it's not good, so that's the first thing that wasn't good. Everything was very good, And he looked around and said, there's one thing that's not good. It's not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. And you could translate that to say an assistant designed for him. God looked at Adam and said, dude, you got holes. We have a young lady that, probably 20 years ago now, I came into contact with. She's maybe more than that, I don't know, but she's a big girl. Her mother died when she was a teenager. Her father remarried and said, get that kid out of here. And so she joined a group that went from church to church, performing skits and singing. While she was there, somebody caught up with her and told her that her dad died of a heart attack. Now, Mary had a dream. She's a big girl. Her dream was to find a big guy, have big kids. She messaged my daughter, who was our contact with her, and said, I found a guy. They began to date. They became engaged. And then she sent a message to my daughter and said, it's all over. And somebody went to Mary's picture in our refrigerator and took a sharp knife and they cut the guy out of the picture and put it back in the refrigerator. So we now have a picture of Mary in the refrigerator with the guy cut out. It was my privilege to speak at Mary's wedding. She came and lived with us. When she first moved under a house, one of the other girls said, God will find you a husband. He always does here. God didn't tell me that you were going to find a husband here. So how did Mary find a husband? In case you're hunting, she went like eHarmony or one of those places which you always find good husbands. And God can work through eHarmony too, and found her a good husband. And I had the honor of speaking at Mary's wedding. And I spoke on the girl with holes in her. Because we all have holes. And God looked at Adam and said, you got holes. So I'm going to make you somebody that matches the holes that you have. And again, that's in our perfect world. And if you look at Genesis 3, you see that everybody is blaming somebody else. Nobody's taking credit for the fault of the fruit. The man said, the woman whom, it's not my fault, it's the woman's fault, whom you gave me, it's your fault, to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree and I ate. Then the Lord God said to the woman, so Eve, what do you have to say for yourself? And she said, the woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. And that's when our world broke. What was broken? When our world broke, what broke? What broke is our relationship with God. You ever feel far from God? You ever feel like you're here and God's somewhere else? And sometimes God is real close. But often God is not real close. Can you imagine what it would be like to be Adam and to be able to talk to God? Physically talk to God. Adam walked through the garden, would talk to God. That relationship was broken because the imperfection of Adam was not allowed to talk to the perfection of God. That will be fixed when we go to heaven. When we go to heaven, and I've had this discussion with a young man who said, how's that going to be? How does God, do you understand the concept that God is omnipresent? He can be anywhere at any time, and so God can talk to me and talk to you and talk to you all at the same time because he's omnipresent. Also, time is a factor that is a thing. Just like space is a thing, time is a thing as well. And so that time can be partitioned out. So man's relationship with God was broken. It took the sacrifices, as Cain and Abel discovered, to temporarily fix it. Then it got permanently fixed with Jesus to fix our relationship with God. Someday we're going to walk with God, talk to God. Man's relationship with the earth was broken. Adam and Eve were on the earth, and they were in fellowship with the earth. They gardened the earth. One of my pet peeves as a farmer was when people talk about farmers deliberately destroying the earth. We do what we can, all right? There are times when we mess it up. We do what we can. We abuse our animals. Do you know what my animals cost? I'm not going to abuse. Now, okay, they talk about the Amish abusing their horses. Do you abuse your car? Well, if you do, then you're going to beat up your car and you're going to need a new car. Man's relationship with the earth was one that allowed them to build it and nurture it. And that world, as we see it, is falling apart. What was corrupted by the fall of man? The relationship between men and women. And that may be of all of the things that I'm in this world saying, that just ain't right. There is something wrong. There is something wrong when you see a husband and wife fighting. And sometimes it's over the silliest things. Some couples here. You ever fight over silly stuff? I haven't for a long, long time. Not since, I don't know, 5 o'clock this morning maybe. Brenda turned off the music at the head of my bed, and I said, what's wrong with you? I need my music to sleep, and she said, I can't sleep with your music. The relationship between men and women has been broken. And so one thing we need to be really careful to do when we study the Bible, that we need to understand that a lot of what we're looking at in the Bible is broken relationships. I always come early so I can listen to John. It always gives me some of the energy that I need and some quiet and whatever. And John's talking about David, and you don't have to think real far to think about broken female-male relationships with David, right? What was David doing watching naked women bathing on other people's rooftops? I'm not sure if John's going to talk about this, but I have this image that David had the tallest building in the house and learned to look into people's courtyards. I don't know.
He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was supposed to be off to war.
He was supposed to be off the war. But what was David doing there anyway? And thanks to Google, I am sitting here while John is back there talking, saying, how many wives did David have? Isn't it amazing? That used to be like a 2-week research as you went through 1st and 2nd Samuel and all the others. 8. David had 8 wives. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So does that mean I can have 8 wives? Man, I can't handle 1 wife. What would I do with 8 wives? But we need to be careful because that relationship was broken, and that shows up as we look through the Bible, that broken relationship. So we're going to be starting by looking at some of that stuff. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Now what you need to understand, this is not a punishment. This is a prophecy. God is saying because of what happened, because of the breaking of the relationship between men and women, this is what's going to happen. So I will multiply your pain in childbearing. Does that mean you can't use painkillers? No. It just is a prophecy saying this is what's going to happen. Your desire will be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Boy, do we see that happening. With these unhappy women whose husbands just bulldoze over their wives. And they basically take their will and push over them. Now we've swung the other direction. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We've swung this other direction where we have the women who say, you can't tell me nothing. And so the men say, okay, fine, then I won't tell you anything. And the women say, well, I can do anything you can do. And the man says, fine, so do it. So the men don't do anything. And the women wind up doing everything, which is also as broken as that. But we've got a problem. And the problem is this. The problem is when two ride a horse, one needs to ride in front. When you're in a marriage, you can't have everybody saying, I don't know, you decide, you decide, you decide, I don't know, you decide, and nobody decides. Somebody has got to be the ultimate leader. Now, one of the things I have to say, I got married, I'd say Brenda and I grew up together. We started dating when she was 16, I was 17. She turned 19 the week before we got married. I turned 20 in our honeymoon, and we kind of grew up together. And so I am this 20-year-old kid, and I am the leader of the family. And I'm the boss of the family. And Brenda wasn't all that impressed. And it took a while, but we have kind of our leadership stuff down now, where I'm in charge of this, and she's in charge of this, and she's in charge of this, and I'm in charge of this. But there are times when a decision needs to be made for good. I would rather somebody else makes the decision, to be honest. But when there is a decision that needs to be made, I make that decision. Because that's where God placed me. And this is a little more than I probably should be talking about, but I'm talking to Mary and her husband. And Mary has a very passive husband, and she is so frustrated when he won't make decisions. Because that part of it isn't working. And it's okay, well, if he doesn't do finances, you do finances. It's all cool, because everybody's going to be doing their thing. Do you think Adam and Eve ever argued about leadership? Hey, you named the hippopotamus. I get to name the animal with a long gray nose. And you can't tell me what to do. I don't think so. Because that was the only couple that God put together deliberately, because you got holes, you got holes. Eve had holes. Adam had holes. And they were merged together into one unit. These things were not the will of God. They are consequences. Childbirth is not a curse. Pain in childbirth is the curse. I've always wondered what it would be like to have childbirth without pain. What was the original way that God intended children to be born? Long hours of hard work are the curse of man. Thistles and thorns are a curse. I've always kind of, in my mind that wanders periodically, everything was created on the first 5 days of creation, right? What about thistles and thorns? Did God create them special? Or they just have another purpose, and God said, you know what, let's take thistles and thorns and turn them into something bad. The complex relationship between the sexes is a curse. Headship is God's will, domination is not. And the balance is really hard sometimes. The desire of women continue to be for a masculine man. Despite all the feminist movement can do, women do not respect a submissive man. And I say that up front, fully barricaded and safe. This comes from Sue Boland from Probe Ministries. And what she's writing about is the lies of feminism. The 10th lie of feminism is that women would enjoy the feminization of men. Feminists believe that the only way to achieve equality of the sexes was to do away with role distinctions. The 10th lie of feminism is that women would enjoy the feminization of men. Feminists believe that the only way to achieve equality of the sexes is to do away with role distinctions. Doesn't that sound very modern? Then they decide that wasn't enough. Society had to do away with gender distinctions, or at least blur the lines. Women embraced masculine values, and men were encouraged to embrace more feminine characteristics. That was supposed to fix the problem, and it didn't. As men tried to be good guys and accommodate feminist demands, the culture saw a new type of man emerge. Sensitive, nurturing, warmly compassionate, yielding. The only problem was that this soft man wasn't what women wanted. Women pushed men to be like women, and women pushed men to be like women, and when they complied, nobody respected them. Women, it turns out, want to be the soft ones. And we want men to be strong and firm and courageous. We want a manly man. When men start taking on feminine characteristics, they're just wimpy and unmasculine, not pleasing themselves or the women who demanded the change. There's a good reason that books and movies with strong masculine heroes continue to appeal to such a large audience. Both men and women respond to men who fulfill God's design for male leadership, protection, and strength. Underlying the women's liberation movement is an angry, unsubmissive attitude that is fueled by the lies of deception. It's good to know what the lies are, but it's also important to know what God's word says so we can combat the lies with the power of truth. Although the role of women varied from time to time and country to country, the general rule was, in Old Testament times, that women were treated as property. Of course, that was a Jewish thing, right? All the other countries were more enlightened. This is from Demosthenes, a Greek. And he said, we keep prostitutes for pleasure, we keep mistresses for day-to-day needs of the body, and we keep wives for the begetting of children and for the faithful guardianship of our homes. So no, Israel is not at fault for having terrible relationship toward women. This was just the way men and women interacted until Jesus came along. Women were thought of as property. We see this in Exodus 20, verse 17 in the 10 Commandments. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything else that is your neighbor's. Your neighbor owns his wife, so don't covet it. We see this in the story of Abraham. You remember the story. Abraham went quickly into the tent of Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of fine flour. When I'm reading this, one of the things that strikes me, when you look at that story, realize how long this takes. I mean, we're there like, we have guests. Oh man, we have guests. Check the refrigerator. Throw it in the microwave, we're good. Look how long this would have taken. Go get flour and make cake. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man. The beef is fresh. It's like running around yet. He prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. He didn't even eat with them. He stood and watched them while they ate. And they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she's in the tent, which is where she should have been. That's where a good wife will be. She's not going to be with the guests. And the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And I find this interesting, like 3,000 years later, 4,000 years later, people are still the same. Sarah may be in the tent, but Sarah is sitting at the tent door with her ear to the tent door listening in the conversation. Some things don't change in 4,000 years. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? As much as we try to westernize the story, Sarah had her own tent. She did not join in with the men when there were visitors, and she would have walked a step behind Abraham when walking beside him. When she had no children, he took an available concubine to have a child, and she called Abraham my Lord. I tried that with Brenda. She refuses. Tone of sarcasm if she calls me my Lord. Levitical rules, though cruel by our standards, were designed to preserve the rights and safety of women. There was care taken that wives are not property to be used and disposed of. They already were considered as property, but when you think of something as property, I think of my yellow car. I drove my yellow car for years until it was worn out, and then I throw it away. So what do you do with a wife who you've had for many years and now is worn out from having a bunch of children? Do you throw her away? And so the Levitical rules are designed to save some of those things. The other thing they're doing is to avoid some of the things that happen in the culture around them. Look at that one. It doesn't say don't sell your daughter as a slave. It allows you to sell your daughter as a slave. But it gives you the rules on how you sell your daughter as a slave. If she doesn't please her master, you have to have that's in the contract with the master. So when you sell your daughter, have a contract that says that he shall let her be redeemed if he doesn't want her anymore. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute. Who even thinks about making your daughter a prostitute? But that had to go in the Levitical rules because it was happening in other areas, and God told Moses this can't be happening among Israel. So you go to war. Again, John is talking about David and all of the wars. So what if you go to war and you kill off all the men, you kill off all the boys, you kill off all the old ladies, and you find this beautiful woman? Here's the procedure for making her your wife. When you go out to war against your enemies and the Lord your God gives you them into your hand and take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife. And something I'll talk about in a minute. So you already have a wife. So this will be your second wife. And you bring her home to your house. She shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house and lament her father and her mother a full month. So you give her a month to recover from having her family killed. And after that, you may get into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. But if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. But you shall not sell her for money. What? Now, some of the things, again, are drawn away from the other countries, where it says if a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. So it's not just the woman's fault, both of them shall die. And we find that in the Old Testament. Again, this is as opposed to other cultures and as opposed to some other things. We see that God speaks to some of the women. And so God, through the Old Testament, is speaking to women. We see him talking to Hagar. Hagar, who, all Hagar is a concubine. And yet, because of Abraham, because of what she's been through, God speaks to Hagar. Isaac prayed for his wife Rebekah because Rebekah couldn't have children. And so he prayed, she became pregnant. Rebekah prayed, and God answered Rebekah. God then say, Isaac, tell Rebekah these things. This is something God told Rebekah directly. 2 nations are in your womb. The 2 peoples from within you are divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. We see that women served in the tabernacle. And this is talking about Moses. He made the basin of bronze and the stand of bronze from the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered in the entrance of the tent of the meeting. Some things never change. Women got their mirrors. And these were brass mirrors, and all the women and must have been a bunch of them, because they were able to make a basin of bronze out of the mirrors that the ministering women had in the tabernacle. In 1 Samuel, we see Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel and how they lay with the women who were serving the entrance to the tent of meeting. Again, this is a kind of a more modern version of the tabernacle. Women singers were part of the temple. For 2 Chronicles, we see in Jeremiah also uttered a lament for Josiah, and the singing men and the singing women have spoken of Josiah. So there were female musicians in Ezra as they're coming back from Babylon, and they're inventorying the land, the people that are coming back. And he said the whole assembly together was 42,365, beside their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 200 male and female singers. So there were female musicians coming back from Israel. In Old Testament, there were heroes. Y'all know the heroes. Hebrews 11 includes Sarah and Rahab, and there was Deborah and Ruth and Esther and Hannah were Old Testament heroes. Despite that, the Old Testament Jews were heavily influenced by the culture of their world, and there was often a double standard. So you know this story when Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, had a son who was evil. His wife did not become pregnant. God struck him down. The wife got handed on to the next son, who also was struck down. And when the third one came along, Judah said, he's really young, let's wait for a while. But he's thinking that God's going to kill this one too. And after a while, Tamar figured out, he's never going to come to me. And so she put herself in the garb of a prostitute. And it says Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she'd covered her face. Apparently that's the only people that covered their face. So he turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that I may come to you? And that was all cool. The fact that Judah did that, nobody condemned Judah for doing that until about 3 months later. She's 3 months pregnant, and she's beginning to show her pregnancy. Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out that she can maybe be burned. So again, this double standard where everything was all cool for Judah, Tamar not so much so. We see that in the New Testament. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and placing her in the midst. They said to her, teacher, this woman's been caught in the very act of adultery, is what it says in the King James. The thing with being caught in the very act is there's a guy involved. Where's he? He doesn't show up. But they've got this woman that they caught, and he's being brought, and Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Remember, we looked back half a dozen slides where it says if somebody's caught in adultery, they're both supposed to be stoned. In this case, the Pharisees said, we caught this woman in adultery. Oh, here's an interesting one. Trivia question. How many children did Jacob have? At least 13. Why 13? Dinah. Okay. Then Jacob tore his garment. This is when Joseph was thrown in jail. Put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days, all of his sons and all of his daughters. Okay, so Dinah was more than just daughters, plural, so it had to be somebody beside Dinah. Rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol for my son, mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Okay, the answer to this question, though, is down here. Isn't that interesting? These are the sons of Leah who she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether, his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The girls didn't count. Nobody bothered counting girls. Now, I have an interesting question. I don't have a good answer to that. Someday I'm going to go to Jacob and ask this question. Did Rachel? Sorry, Rebecca. Where are we? Rachel. Rachel in there. Rachel. Did Rachel have girls? Did she keep getting pregnant and having girl after girl after girl? But they didn't count because they're girls. And then finally Joseph came along and she said, finally a boy. And she named him Give Me Another One, which is a great name for a boy. Polygamy was common, especially among the wealthy and powerful. So this is the first that had more than one wife. This is back, Cain knew his wife, yada, yada. I didn't bother going down through, how many generations that is down from Adam. But Lamech took 2 wives. This happened very early after the creation. Abraham obviously had multiple wives. He had the sons of his concubines. Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. So again, he had called them concubines, called them wives. He had something that looked like a wife. You have Jacob, with Rachel and Leah. Gideon had multiple wives. Elkanah. One of the things that I love about studying is, even my old age, I keep learning stuff. I thought that I knew the story of Hannah. And I thought that Hannah couldn't have children, so he married this other woman because Hannah couldn't have children. But look at this. There was a certain man of Ramoth, Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zoph, an Ephraimite. He just had 2 wives. It says nothing about marrying Peninnah later. He just says he has 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. 1:4, on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all of her sons and daughters. She had a bunch of them. She had a whole swarm of them. So I have a feeling that Hannah may have actually been younger. That he married Peninnah. She had a whole slew of children. Hannah did not have any children, and Peninnah started to harass her because she's the younger wife. And she's jealous of her. And she starts to harass him. And then we know that story. After they'd eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting in the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. And we see in 1 Samuel, and his mother used to make for him a little robe, take it to him each year. When she went up to her husband for the yearly sacrifice, she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters after Samuel. So she wasn't 60, I don't think. Because after Samuel was born, she had 5 more children. So she was apparently still pretty young, but she was starting to feel the clock ticking. It's been 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Now she's in her 20s, no children. And her rival wife is harassing her. King David. As I said, I just Googled him, and he's got 8 wives that they know of. There may be some other odds and ends and concubines and whatever. And then we have King Solomon. I am always stuck on King Solomon because of the little boy who came back from Sunday school, and his dad said, "What did you learn about?" We learned about Solomon today. What did you learn about Solomon? He had 600 wives and 300 porcupines. And I'm thinking that's probably a lot what it was like. But when you think about how that actually worked, what that meant is you're rich. You see a beautiful girl and you say, come on, I'm going to marry you, and you spend a week or a month or whatever with that girl, and then you tire of her and you bring in somebody else and you never see the other girl again. That's what those wives and concubines really were. They were basically glorified prostitutes, but rather than just being a prostitute, you actually married them, brought them in, and you could get rid of them when you wanted to. Just send them off to your harem a little bit. Surely by the first century, things would have improved. Let's take a break, and we'll drop into the first century a little bit. After the break, we kind of talked about the fall, the broken world we live in, or they lived in, and we'll take it up from there. As I was reminded during the break, as bad as things are, they can always get worse. Again, I'm back into the Chronicles of Narnia, and any of you know the Chronicles of Narnia recognize Puddleglum the Marshwiggle from the Silver Chair, who everything was going to get worse for Puddleglum the Marshwiggle. But you would think that 2,000 years later, they would have improved things somewhat. You would think.
They figured something out.
So this is Philo. Philo says women should stay indoors as much as possible, not meddling in affairs outside the household management. Rabbi Jose ben Jachin, right around the time of Jesus, said, let thy house be opened wide, and let the needy be thy household, and prolong not conversation with women. Such talk, even with one's wife, could lead to Gehenna. In the Mishnah, conversations with a woman in a public place was particularly scandalous, even if she were a member of one's own family. Do not talk to your daughter or to your wife in the public marketplace. That is scandalous. You may wind up in Gehenna as a result. There were apparently no segregation in areas between men and women in the tabernacle. So we see Hannah with an eye shot of Eli as she prayed. So there appears to be no division between the worship places in the tabernacle. The first temple, Solomon's temple, had a division between the priests and the commoners. Herod's temple had concentric circles of holiness from the court of the Gentiles to the Holy of Holies. So Herod's temple looked kind of like this. So on the outside was the court of the Gentiles. I find this amazing. It seems like every year I have something on the temple. I can not avoid having a picture of the temple. Every year, something's got to be in the temple.
And every year is different.
It's a different picture. Because the court of the Gentiles, you and I would be allowed to be there. Right there is a wall. It's a short wall. There's little openings in, and on either side of those openings, there's a brass plate that said, if you go through here and you're a Gentile, we can kill you. And they've actually found one of those plates. So in here is the court of the women. So the women are allowed to go in that far. The men are allowed to go in that far. The priests, and we're going to talk about this with Zechariah a little later, are allowed to go in that far. And the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies once a year. But the women are definitely segregated from the men into how far they're able to go. Solomon's temple had women singers. We talked about that. Herod's temple, adolescent Levite boys sang the female parts. Didn't want women in the temple. In the intertestamental time between the Old and New Testament, the rabbis made rules that were considered law. So they were a little bit below Old Testament law, but they were still there. And Jesus referred to that and said, you leave the commandments of God and hold to the tradition of men. These are these laws here. You have a fine way of rejecting the commandments of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or mother, whatever you would have gained from me is korban, that is to God, you no longer permit them to do anything for his father or mother. In other words, okay, I have this thing, and Candace knows this. I have told my kids, I've given away all of my stuff as I've gone. So when I no longer can earn money, I'm going to come live with you. And so just be ready. And these people are saying that I can say my stuff is dedicated to God. And so when my parents are old and needy, I'm going to say, tough beans, I gave mine to God, sorry about that. But this is the tradition of men as opposed to the law of God. In the Old Testament, children were glorified. New Testament, children are still glorified. Barren women were pitied or looked down on. The answer was often add a wife for the sake of having children. Not a wonderful answer, but a little better than that. The rabbis instructed that it was the duty of a man to divorce his wife if she were childless. So if you had a wife who didn't have any children, you couldn't have multiple wives anymore, so it was your religious duty to divorce her. Okay, so here are some of the first century Jewish laws. You could not be part of the quorum to make up a synagogue. They needed 10 men to make up a synagogue. Now, one of the things you need to realize is that their synagogues back then were really pretty small. And so you often had multiple synagogues. Like you look, and I don't have this on the top of my head exactly, but if you go back and you look at Stephen, Stephen had said that he was a member of the synagogue of the freedmen and the Cilicians and somebody else. So there were apparently 3 synagogues that got together on occasion, maybe to make a quorum. This apparently is what's going on here. We see this in Philippi. And on the Sabbath day, and this is one of the things that's interesting to me, where, okay, so you're Paul, right? You're the Apostle Paul. You're traveling kind of midway through your second missionary journey. You go to Troas, and a vision appears to you, come over to Macedonia. So you go over to Macedonia, you land in Philippi, and swarms of people come to, no. He goes to a women's Bible study. This is the first people that Paul interacted with after he was called from Troas. We went outside the gate to the riverside where we supposed there was a place of prayer. Paul is hunting for people. There's not a Jewish synagogue here because there's not enough Jews to make a Jewish synagogue. So we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. So this was on a Sabbath day morning, and there's a bunch of women who gathered together because there weren't 10 of them. There weren't 10 men. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And I think next year I'm going to do women in the epistles. And so Lydia will be a key person in the epistles. Because Lydia says is a strong woman. Says that she compelled them to come live with her. Paul said, I'm not sure. And Lydia said, no, dude, you're coming with us. Just don't even argue you are going to be with us. You could not give the blessing at a meal. Don't think about asking your wife to bless the food. In fact, your wife wasn't sitting at the meal, so that's kind of not the issue anyway. She's not allowed to sit there. Only the men were required to, that's probably a bad, I should rephrase that a little bit. Only the men went to Jerusalem for the 3 main feasts. You're only required to. But when Jesus debated the scholars, Mary was there. So Mary was there regardless of whether you were supposed to be there or not. Women were not allowed to read the Torah in the synagogue. Reading was not common to begin with. And this is some questions we're not sure about. It's estimated that 10 to 20% of men were literate. Was Joseph literate? Zechariah was literate because when they asked him about John the Baptist, he wrote down his name. So Zechariah was literate. Women were 1 to 2% literate. So in a group of 100 women, 1 or 2 could read. Could Mary read? Almost certainly not. That changes some things. And Mary, and we're going to be talking about Mary quite a bit coming up here pretty shortly. But Mary knew the Magnificat, or made the Magnificat. The Magnificat was kind of a rough working of Hannah's song in the Old Testament, and she would have learned that in the synagogue. She heard it in the synagogue. Not taught, heard it in the synagogue. But she sucked it in. She's absorbed her teaching. And just saying she didn't have any phones to take pictures of the slides either, which is all cool. But and this is just a little bit of a side thing, but isn't technology great until it's not? I mean, let's just do this just for fun. Okay, so I was looking for something last night for this. And so I was looking up the, when Luke is writing the book of Luke, if Luke is part of the company, he writes down we. And that way you know that Luke is there. If he is not there, it's they or them. And so I wanted to confirm, like the last time, we're going to get to this about midway through the week probably. I wanted to confirm when the last time that Luke was with Paul before he was arrested, and the first time after he was arrested. And so I just looked up we. Trivia for the day. The word we shows up 1,336 times in the Bible. And I know that because I just clicked on it right here and it said we, search. But I can't find stuff in the Bible. I was looking up, so where is it in the New Testament it talks about Sarah calling Abraham Lord? Okay, so you're old people who know stuff like this. Right, exactly. And I am a slave of this particular technology, and I looked up Sarah Lord. Oh, right there it is. It's Sarah and Lord are together. And here's in the Old Testament where she calls him Lord. And I'm not sure whether that's an awful thing. I mean, it's a tool that allows me to pull out just incredible stuff where I'm thinking, very, very quick. But it hasn't moved from here to here, or it hasn't moved from here to here. It is kind of the problem. And so, are we literate today? Are we biblically literate today? Or do we just have it on here? Or, what did I do with my phone? Somewhere I got a phone. I got a phone. Here. Because kind of the same tools are in here, just not so big and fancy and cool to get to. Many leaders frowned on any but the most basic religious training for women. No record of any woman before Jesus being a disciple of a rabbi. Do you think that bothered the Pharisees? As Jesus is teaching, and the Pharisees are saying, dude, what are you doing with all the women? Why are these women following you around? What's the deal here?
It's outside the box.
It is very outside the box. It is so outside the box you can't see the box anymore. They could not inherit. And so parents died, you married and passed it on to your husband because you couldn't personally inherit. You could not be a witness in a trial if you're a female because they are not trustworthy. I'm not sure if this is my notes anywhere or not, but somewhere in there I was reading, this is like in the Middle Ages, this is beyond that they were teaching women could not be educated because if they thought too hard, they would have a mental breakdown. Their brains just weren't functional enough to actually study stuff. And so as a result, they're not reliable witnesses if you're at trial. it's interesting that they were the witnesses of the resurrection. The men were hiding.
First, they were first there.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it. You can't witness anything if you're not there.
They were at the crucifixion too.
They absolutely were.
We know there was only one disciple.
Yeah, and he apparently left. He left with Mary. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the synagogue had a leader's bench and a men's section and a women's section. As justified by down in here in Zechariah, it says that the families of the house of Levi by themselves, the wives by themselves, the family of the Shemites by itself, the wives by themselves. So they justified that. And it appears that some of the same tradition carried into the early church. All right. So any of you remember church when the men and the women were separate? Yeah. I remember, my mom being over there and my dad being over here, and that's just the way it was. And if I were visiting, I would be so confused. I would sit on the wrong side. It reminds me of my wife and I are like Costco people, and so we go to Lancaster or Costco, we know where everything is. If you go to the Harrisburg Costco, everything is exactly opposite. You have to close your eyes and say the butter is over there and the cereal is there because you have to look in a mirror to see where everything is. Now, it is thought that this may have actually had something, because this is an issue we're going to have to deal with at some point in this week. The women should keep silent in the churches. All right, we've just learned everything we need to learn. We're done for the week, right? Time to go home. For they are not permitted to speak, should be in submission, as the law also says, if there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husbands at home. What do you do when the husbands don't know anything? I have one of the things that just always blows my mind is the way we do like these mental judging of people. You look at somebody and like Annie, who I'm going to pick up, this girl with the pink hair. When I actually physically met her for the first time, God had pointed her out, and I'm walking across town to talk to her, and I am not sure what to say. I just had a beep. I'll bet you that's from Annie. It is from Annie. But I didn't know what to say. I'm thinking, what do? Do you say, God sometimes points kids out to me? What do you say? I met her, and I said, sometimes God points kids out to me, and she threw herself in my arms and put her head in my shoulder and said, I'm so tired of doing it alone. We judge people. We judge people from the outside. I mean, y'all look like you have your ducks in a row, right? I look in here, and everybody's got a perfect life running. And y'all say, sure I do. Because we judge in the outside. I was at a farm up in New York. And this is a fairly new farm for me. And the owner of the farm is a woman who is Oriental. Her name is Maya. And you're looking at her, and she's got 2 boys and no husband. And I'm just, okay, we'll just kind of keep under the radar here. But I somehow can never not talk about God and talk about Bible, whatever. And so, like the second test or something like that, I'm there, and I said something about, teaching at some sort of a seminar. And 5 minutes later, she turned to me and said, I have a question. I said, sure. She said, where did Paul come up with all his theology? He apparently didn't have any official Christian training. Where did he come up with his theology? I said, that was not what I was expecting to come from Maya. And then about a month ago, she texted me and said, hey, I have a question for you. I said, sure. She said, can you give me 8 points that Jesus would have used in his teaching that came from the Old Testament? So we judge people, and I was with Maya, and she was talking about she's leading a Bible study, and she said that the problem in her church is that the women have their Bible study, and the men have nothing. And so the women are more biblically... No kidding, right. Because we've got jobs to hold down, right? We've got to do manly stuff. So, what happens when you go home to ask your husband hasn't a clue. But if you put that into verse up ahead, so this is actually a follow-up of this. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace in all the churches of the saints. The women should keep silent, etc. So the thought is that they were working with churches. Again, when I say churches, these are mostly house churches. We're not talking about a 600-member church. We're talking about a 30-member house church. And they're probably separated between side to side. Women are here, men are here. And the preacher's up front expounding. And the wife is saying, honey, what did he say? I didn't understand that. And it also comes in with the sense of speaking in tongues and needing an interpreter and the whole thing. And there is some thinking that Paul very well may have said, okay, for the peace of the church, everybody zip it. And we're not going to be yelling back and forth across the aisle. You know, let's have things in peace, and you go home and you ask your husband. And again, these are a whole generation of people that weren't educated because women just weren't educated. Women had little, when we get to Mary and Joseph, I'm going to blow this topic way up. But women had little say in whom they married. The Mishnah said marriage is by money, intercourse, or writ. So in other words, you can go buy a wife. You know, you go to somebody, you got a really hot daughter there. How many cows do you want for your daughter? You come up with an agreement and it's there. Intercourse. In the Old Testament, in the Levitical law, it says that if you have sex with somebody, you're married. You know, just deal with it. Or writ. In other words, an agreement. You go up to the father or whoever, guardian, and say, you know, can we come to an agreement for this particular woman? But the women normally had little to do. And I'm going to talk about that when we talk about Mary and Joseph. Normally the heads of the households made the agreement. Except for rare occasions, women could not initiate divorce. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia says their social relationships were mostly confined to other women. Women did not eat with male guests, and men were discouraged from talking with women. And that's the world that Jesus arrived into. What did he change? We see in Matthew something changes, in that in Matthew, the genealogies included women. And they're generally not real safe women. Tamar we talked about because she was the one that got pregnant by her father-in-law by pretending to be a hooker. We have Rahab, who was, depending on she was either a prostitute or an innkeeper, depending on your terminology, and sometimes there's a little slidey between which one was which. And this one was interesting because they don't even put Bathsheba's name in here. She's the wife of Uriah.
Remember, she was the wife of Uriah. To say, remember.
Remember, yeah. Yeah, that's... Oh, Ruth, yes, it's right there. I didn't circle it.
Some things there.
Yeah, now that was a little fishy too because she wasn't Jewish. Yeah, and so the fact that those women were included in the genealogies just right off the bat started to show how things were different under Jesus. We see the women were welcomed in with the disciples. Soon afterward, they went through the cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Now, there's some question here about how, were all of these women cured of evil spirits and infirmities, or is this just kind of a group? So, for example, did the woman with the issue of blood follow Jesus? And so, is that actually a group? Or, so Mary Magdalene, we know, had 7 demons cast out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. So we have a little bit of aristocracy here. and Susanna, and many others who provide for them out of their means. The name Susanna implies that she may not have been Jewish even, who knows? And the feeding the 5,000, the feeding the 4,000, we see the 5,000 men besides women and children. So the women and children are all just kind of there. Besides, yeah. Oh yes, there's some women and children.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot about them just about. This one is interesting to me. I want you to follow through with me on this one. Okay, so this is the road to Emmaus. That very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus and 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other and all the things that happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it's toward evening, the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. So whoever these 2 people were, and some of the other translations say 2 disciples. They call them 2 disciples. But he went in to stay with them. So whoever they are, they live together. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened to him in these days?" Now, backing up to the crucifixion, but standing by the cross of Jesus was his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Same guy. Cleopas is Greek. Clopas is Aramaic. Okay, so y'all are aware that in the book of John, John does not show up by name.
Yeah.
Do you know who also the disciples do not show up in the book of John? James. John's brother does not show up in the book of John. Now, is it possible? Do you notice that doesn't say Mary? Remember? John is now the caretaker of Mary.
So she's,
Falls among the unnamed.
yeah.
So she falls among the unnamed, and I think his mother's sister may also fall in the realm of the unnamed for the same reason. Because John is a little cautious about lifting himself up. You know, oh, by the way, I was just hanging around with, Obama last week. You know, you don't lift yourself up like that. But it appears that the 2 on the road to Emmaus, who in some translations and some versions are called disciples or followers, was Cleophas and Mary, his wife, are the 2 on the road to Emmaus. Women were welcome with the disciples, Mary Magdalene, who we are going to look at later. Oh, man. He treated even marginalized women with respect. And we're at 12:03. I don't want to go there. So, we'll be back tomorrow and look at marginalized women. The women that your mother warned you about.